The 8th of May 2019 will mark South Africa's 6th general election since the dawn of democracy in 1994. In the last few weeks, politicians have been trying to convince you to choose them on election day. What will you do? Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the Democracy Gauge. I'm Bongani Bingwa. It's the penultimate episode of the program. We will, of course, be going to the polls to choose representatives for the National Assembly and Provincial Legislatures. By voting, we exercise a hard-fought constitutional right. Political parties have been campaigning across the country, trying to convince you to pick them. Supporters have been flocking to stadia to listen to leaders, and this weekend, of course, we'll see the final election rallies, and then it's all up to you, the voter. So tonight's show then looks at the psychology of the voter and voting patterns across the country. Hence our poll question. We're asking, are you voting on the 8th of May? You can choose from three colors. Green is yes. If you're still undecided, go with maybe, that's yellow. And of course, no is another option, and that's red. Send us a WhatsApp video, 065-862-4548. You can interact with our poll on SABCnews.com. The conversation continues on Facebook and Twitter. And of course, remember our hashtags, SABCDG25 and hashtag SABCNews. How do you choose who to vote for? Do you vote along sentiment, experience, loyalty, perhaps even frustration? I mean, is your vote a reward or a punishment? Today we bring you a case study of how some communities are feeling. It comes from rural Eastern Cape. The Amatole region has seen some of the largest and most violent public protests by an unhappy community. People there want services like water, housing, roads, and of course they want jobs. Many of them, though, have shunned voter registration as a method of protest. Our journalist Iviwe Poti produced this insert.
A cry for services, demanding to be heard, sending a clear message, summoning leaders to address their grievances. The Amatole district is comprised of mainly rural areas. The lack of development in these areas has prompted the community action. The protests became a last resort. The affected communities say their pleas to government fell on deaf ears.
We haven't seen any development since 1994. As you were coming here, I'm sure you could see that the roads are in a bad state. We don't know what's happening, but hey, we're not going to vote. And when it comes to the issue of land, we have not yet been compensated, but yet our land keeps being stolen.
Early 90s, after election.
Young people have joined the protest, expressing their disappointment.
I'm not going to vote. I'll be in solidarity with the community. We'll sit and not vote. Mind you, the youth is not employed. I'm one of those.
Those that did not register out of protest will not be able to vote.
We stand by our decision not to vote, and we do not regret it.
I feel disappointed that I couldn't vote because it was going to be my first time.
The registration and election boycott symbolizes their dissatisfaction with their political leaders. The aggrieved residents say they'll refrain from violence on election day, but warn that the promises made must be kept after the 8th of May.
There's a rumor that is spreading around. A region of the ruling party is dissolve Masipala after elections.
We want to promise them one thing. If they dissolve our municipality, we will get back to what we did initially. We won't back down.
Dissolve Masipala after election. Sizakuyiphinda siqale phansi ngoba uMasipala ayingowabo ngowethu.
Iviwe Poti, SABC News, Amatole.
Well, joining us now from our Durban studio is SABC News specialist political researcher Ronesh Doraj, who joins us now for the Democracy Gauge. Ronesh, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us. Perhaps I should say, for people of your generation and mine, the idea of exercising your right not to vote is perhaps a difficult one, but of course it is a valid option, is it not?
It is, obviously, and remember, we have to remember that, to obtain that democratic vote, there was a very, very long and painful fight to actually reach 1994, where we actually got that opportunity to vote. I recall, I may be giving my age away here, but I voted for the very first time. I think I just turned 18 or 19 in 1994, and I vividly remember going to that primary school, 2 kilometers away from our house, and actually making that mark, next to that political party that I wanted to. And my entire family also stood in that line. So, for us, it was a very momentous occasion. And the fact that 25 years later, we have, whole communities protesting, and another form of protest is actually withholding that vote, tells you a lot. These things should not be happening 25 years after South Africa attained freedom, attained democracy, because we all know what a painful fight and what a painful struggle it has been to actually earn that vote, to have a say in our country's future, in our country's development.
Ronesh, ditto for me. I was 19 years old. I mean, we had the sense of optimism, right? We thought we were going to be the generation who were going to be the first recipients of freedom and all the possibilities that would bring. And yet the story we've just seen from Amatole in the Eastern Cape is a story you can see in many communities around the country, communities who feel that materially democracy has not delivered.
Yeah, Bongani, at Research, what we have done is we've been tracking these protests. These protests first emerged, on a national full scale from October 2004. If we look at those statistics, thus far we have had close to 2,100 protests in all 9 provinces. These grievances that the communities are protesting about, recently we saw the protests erupt in Alexandra, a very prominent but poor township in the heart of Gauteng, in the heart of one of the most prosperous metros in the country, the engine room of the African continent, Johannesburg. So these protests are absolutely valid, because how can you have a township such as Alexandra residing next to a place like Sandton, which is probably which houses the richest square mile on the African continent? There is a binary opposition there, and the two don't actually reconcile. So politicians, when they seek out the vote for their political party next week, Wednesday, I think they need to look at all of these factors. What we need to do, what do we need to do to actually correct the, these misperceptions, these misconceptions of the past 25 years? Some have benefited from the prosperity of this country since 1994, while others have been left behind. So all these politicians, if you look at the manifestos, they have very lofty promises, but no one is asking the question, how do you actually deliver on those promises? If you look at the manifesto of the EFF, lots of lofty promises about the social grants, doubling of the social grants. Even the DA speaks about possibly, using social grants just to uplift those poorer communities. But no one is asking, and no one is telling those communities, where is the money going to come from? So along with those manifestos, I think we also need very, very clear answers from the politicians. And, thus far from what I've been seeing, in the media, in media reports, in the campaigning spree from all the parties, we have 78 different political parties across the country, 48 contesting nationally. They're all speaking a lot of rhetoric, but none are really connecting to those communities to tell them, this is how we aim to address your problems, and this is the reason we are seeing the kind of protests that we are seeing. Ronesh, I remember around election time, I'm going to
come in there, Ronesh, and ask you this question. I mean, we've talked about how, choosing not to vote is obviously a democratically valid option. And yet from research I have seen, studies show that in fact tends to benefit the status quo. So in a way, although it's a protest vote, it may well end up benefiting the very people against whom that protest is being made.
I absolutely agree. And, a very good example of this was the 2016 local government elections. Everyone knows that turnout played a huge factor in the way, the overall control played out in the metros. If we look at Gauteng, if we look at those three major metros, Tshwane, Johannesburg, and Ekurhuleni to a certain degree, but also Ekurhuleni, Johannesburg, Tshwane, and obviously Nelson Mandela Bay Metro in the Eastern Cape. Even the ANC itself admitted that their people stayed away on that day, and that's the reason the party was pulled below 50%. So absolutely agree that when people withhold their vote, the turnout kind of benefits the opposition and not necessarily the party that registered voters are actually protesting against.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, Ronesh Doraj, in our Durban studios. You're watching the Democracy Gauge. It's our penultimate episode, and coming up next, we'll be looking at some of your views, what you've had to say about whether or not you are voting next Wednesday.
On Trends Travel, we bring you a full guide on all things lifestyle related. With so much to discover, we give you comprehensive reviews of places to visit, music, travel, and food. We also explore the arts, whether on or off stage. All this and more, be sure to tune into Trends Travel, Saturdays at 5:30 p.m.
The SABC News mobile app is your one-stop digital portal to all the news you need. Stay connected with the latest in breaking news. Watch the SABC News channel along with clips and live streams of all the big news events. And listen to all the SABC News radio stations live, including podcasts and much more. Simply download the SABC News app to your Android or iOS device from either the Play Store or the App Store. SABC News, independent, impartial.
We do not just speak. We let every voice in our nation find full expression in language and in culture. We do not just teach. We empower all people with education. We do not just bring you the news. We place you where the news is happening. We do not just entertain. We take you on journeys. We do not just broadcast sport. We create an arena for sporting heroes to inspire you. Ours is not just a job, it's a calling to ensure that everyone in our nation is informed, educated, and entertained. We're able to do this because you do your part. SABC TV licenses. It's all made possible by you.
This week on Health Talk. What is the role of a nurse?
The role of a nurse is a very broad one. It starts with assisting patients with self-care activities.
Are people happy with the level of nursing care in South Africa?
I'm satisfied.
I won't say I'm satisfied as such.
They tend to be very good.
Yeah. For me, I'm side. I bang pete
every Saturday at 9 a.m.
Welcome back to the Democracy Gauge. We're continuing our conversation on the psychology of the voter with SABC News specialist political researcher Ronesh Doraj. He joins us from our studios in Durban. Welcome back, Ronesh. All right, if we talk then about the psychology of the voter, many people are thinking about their choices from different perspectives. Some it's sentiment, some it's experience. What goes through the mind of the voter in finally making that choice?
I think, Bongani, South Africa is one of those very unique nations where the liberation narrative plays a huge role in deciding vote outcomes. If you look at the trends between 1994 and 2014, this is the reason the ANC has won the majorities it has won. Despite the opinion polls, whatever they are saying about, the ANC's chances in next week's elections, I still think he can between 55 and 58% of that. And there is no way that the ANC will pull below that 50% plus one majority in next week's elections. Just going back to the liberation narrative, you also got to tie this up with the registered voters roll. If you look at that voters roll, 55% of them are women and 45% of them are men. Now, a very important part of that registered voters roll is that the youth only comprise around 21% of the entire registered voter population, and the biggest demographic of that registered voter roll is people aged between 30 to 49. They actually make up 45% of the voters roll. So I think in that sense, the ANC is secure in the majority because those are the people that experienced apartheid before 1994, and they're highly likely to still vote for the ANC. When it comes to parties like the DA, obviously the DA is an urban party. The DA will again appeal to that urban voter in those 8 metros, and they will target metros like Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. Cape Town, I reckon, is still very safe for the DA. I think their majority will be slightly reduced, but I think Cape Town is theirs. The ANC will continue to govern 7 metros, while the provinces, while the DA will continue to govern the Western Cape.
Well, you talk about the struggle narrative, and as you outline, it still pays a dividend, particularly for the governing party. What do you make of so many young people choosing not to vote? Is it a lack of interest? Is it apathy? Or is it protest?
I think it's a confluence of factors because, again, if you go back to the voters' roll, if you look at all the 8 metros, within those metros, we normally get very forward-minded people, the black middle classes, the middle classes, so to speak. And within the metros, the registered youth population should actually be much, much more than the 19% that we are only seeing in those registered metros, especially in Gauteng. I think in all the 8 metros, it's around 20, 21%. So I think there is a gap, there is a disjuncture, there is a disconnect. Are politicians really speaking to youth matters? If you look at the EFF is the only party from where I am sitting in terms of a research perspective. They went out to campuses, they went out to places where the youth actually congregate, and they spoke to youth issues. If you look at the manifesto as well, prominent parts of the manifesto speak to women issues, prominent parts of the manifesto speak to youth issues. So the youth, probably why they didn't register for these elections, probably they're thinking why? Why should we actually speak, have our voices heard in these elections? Then if you look back at 2014, around 6 million youth voters would have voted, but they chose not to vote. In 2016, the same, there was missing 6 million. In terms of turnout, do the youth actually turn out on voting day if they are registered to vote? Absolutely yes. So there is that market for political parties to exploit. A very good example is 2016. 2016, we had around, I think it was around 71% of those aged 18 to 19 who actually came out to vote. They were registered to vote. And within the 20 to 29 category, 50% of those voters actually showed up at the ballot box to make their mark. And a very good example is the 2014 elections. Those aged between 18 to 29, 73% of those guys actually turned up to say, yes, we want a stake in this country. We want our voice to be heard going ahead for the next 5 years. So I think the political speak from the politicians needs to be looked at very, very closely.
All right, Ranesh, we'll have to leave it there. Who are going to be the biggest losers and winners? We'll find out next week. A reminder then of our poll question this evening. Are you voting on the 8th of May? Green is yes. If you're still hesitant, you'll go with yellow for maybe. And of course, if you are not voting, red will be your color. Do send us a WhatsApp video, 065-862-4548. We'll share some of those after the break. Ronesh, thank you very much. You're free to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Bongani.
Thank you.
We're explorers. We always have been, endlessly curious, always looking for answers, for new frontiers, for new stories. Because that is who we are. From script to screen, from yelling action to taking you on a journey. Radio producers, script writers, on-air presenters, news reporters, sports analysts. We spend late nights creating captivating storylines and earlier mornings keeping you informed, educated, and entertained. For us, it's not a job, it's a calling. We do this and more because you do your part. SABC TV licenses, made possible by you.
Everyone wants a dignified funeral.
That is what a clientele funeral plan can give you. Lasting dignity.
I just want my family to be there, all relaxed, not worrying about paying for anything, knowing that clientele covered everything.
I would like a dignified funeral, and the rest should be invested for my children's future.
Clientele funeral plans pay out in 24 hours. We will even send 200 Rand airtime. You can cover up to 13 people on one plan. Plans include grocery, unveiling, and transport benefit. Plus, you can get all your premiums back.
I told my family, I don't want a fancy funeral. They must come there for a cook sister and a sandwich, and then they must use the rest of the money for their future.
I will never stop paying my monthly premium. To me, paying my monthly premium is as important as buying groceries.
SMS LIFE to 31043 and we'll call you back.
Now, the People's View allows you to interact with us and to share your views directly with the show. We've been asking you to send us WhatsApp videos. Let's take a look at what you have to say.
So yes, I'm definitely going to vote, but I'm still uncertain on who to vote for because no party really instills any confidence in me. And especially not the big three, not the ANC, not the EFF or the DA.
Yes, I'm going to vote because my vote is my power. Even if I don't know what's going to happen, I'm just trusting God that the party that I'm going to vote for will do us good as South Africans.
I am definitely going to be exercising my right to vote. That is my power, and it is my responsibility to choose leaders and a political party that's going to represent me in parliament, because whatever they're going to do is going to affect me, whether indirectly or directly.
Well, as you know, of course, here on the show, we've crisscrossed the country, getting the stories of ordinary South Africans, getting their reflections on the last 25 years of democracy. You can check out all those stories on our website, sabcnews.com/elections. And there is the mapper, and it's all dotted with various people's stories. But today we're doing something a little different. We meet the former South African editor and journalist Nick Dawes, who's now the media deputy executive director at Human Rights Watch in New York. We caught up with him for his take on the last 25 years of democracy.
My name is Nick Dawes. I grew up in Cape Town and I spent much of my professional life there and in Johannesburg. I was editor-in-chief of the Mail and Guardian newspaper, and after having done that for a number of years, I went to work in India at a large Indian news company called Hindustan Times Media Limited. I moved to the United States from India in the autumn of 2016, and I came here to work at Human Rights Watch, which is a global non-profit which works by investigating human rights abuses.
Hello, Nick.
Thank Thank you. So one of the things that has really struck me about following developments in South Africa and remaining involved in discussions about many of them is that the stories we were beginning to track and cover when I was at the Mail and Guardian, going back to 2008, 2009, just as former President Jacob Zuma was coming into power, really played out fully in the last couple of years. And they played out both in the sense that they began to drive the big political developments in the ruling party and the country at large, but also in the sense that we saw how deep and profound the impact of the corruption of the Zuma years was across South African life, and how that impacted not only economic growth, but also people's rights. We are hearing, I think, some encouraging language from Cyril Ramaphosa around the direction that South Africa wants to set in the coming years. So we are seeing a process play out at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, which really is ventilating the depth and breadth and scale of some of these issues. We are hearing from President Ramaphosa his intent to prosecute a more human rights-based and ethical foreign policy. We are seeing him put people in important positions like National Director of Public Prosecution, people who believe in accountability, it appears. A lot of South Africans who are outside the country left because they wanted to go away from South Africa. I didn't leave to get away from South Africa. I left to practice my craft and work on the things that I believe in a more global context, and to take the incredibly powerful lessons of South Africa into a global setting, and to also learn from the global setting maybe things that will apply in South Africa. So for me, being outside South Africa is a way to continue being South African. And I think if there was work that was exciting for me to do and that I felt I could really pursue the same agenda in an impactful way in South Africa, I would certainly consider going back. So I'm going to go with red, because as much as I'd like to say that I think we're kind of on the bubble and if we can just get things right in the next few months we'll be okay, that's not where we are as a country. The forces that have built up in our country and the damage that's been done over the past decade are so urgent that I think we really need the VUCA signal, that we need to get back to building a democracy in which people are able to realize their potential, in which their rights are respected, and in which justice is realized. And there's a huge amount of work to be done on that front. So to hold up this card is not to say that there's no hope, but it's to say that we are really in the last moments of the game here, and we have to get it right now.
Our final chance, some people would say, next week. Right before we say goodbye, let's take a look then at the results for today's poll. There they are coming up on your screen. 73% of you say you will be voting next week. Tomorrow is our final show in the series. Please join us for that as we celebrate South African excellence and look at how the country is going to move forward for the next 25 years. From Fortune, myself and the rest of the team, until tomorrow, good night.